Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Episode of the Daily Trend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Malmer, today joined by Makone Maja. Let us get into the first news story of today, and this is some statements made by Panyaza Lesufi, which I think kind of say the quiet part out now. And we'll get into it in a second. So, Panyaza Lesufi was criticizing the DA taking the Employment Equity Act to court. He is echoing much of what the ANC has been saying recently, that the arguments are flawed and anti-transformation. He also accused the DA of thriving on disinformation and prioritizing privilege over equality. But the thing that's caught headlines was when he said that the DA was fundamentally an enemy of the ANC. He said, "We've always characterized the DA as an anti-transformational political party that wants to delay the transformation agenda that we aspire to. And the leadership of the DA, through their leader, they've always wished to see the end of the ANC. I mean, there's a popular quotation by Helen Ziller that she saw the death of certain political parties, and now she's living to see the death of the ANC. So you can't characterize such a party as a friendly force of the ANC." Obviously, they have found a new strategy now of going to courts literally on everything that we put on the agenda. And that's another area of struggle we are getting prepared for. They will oppose any transformation agenda and thrive on disinformation. I mean, their current posture to say employment equity means black people that are unskilled will be promoted to positions. It's really naive and backwards in any form. He wanted to say, what we are arguing for is to give those people opportunities and therefore to mobilize society. That we have kind of equality means the economy is not going to perform as if you're not in support of economic growth. It's a misrepresentation of that, but we are not apologetic that the DA is not an ally of the African National Congress. So I'm truncating his comments there a bit, Makone, but sort of by calling the DA an enemy of the ANC, I think it's unusual for someone who's in coalition with another party to call them the enemy. The DA still holds positions within the Government of National Unity, and yet it's undeniably true. This is a point that when I was originally arguing against the formation of the GNU, as I did a lot on this podcast back last year, that at the end of the day, kind of a policy decision needs to be made, and the overlap between the ANC and DA and their worldviews is just so small. And I think that has become a reality where the parties kind of both need each other for political purposes. They both, the DA wants to show what it can do. It wants to prove to people that it can govern. The ANC doesn't want to get into bed with the EFF and MK for various reasons. And yet they can't agree on anything. I don't know. What do you make of all of these things? I mean, Panyaza Lesufi says a lot of things here. What's your take on it?
You know, Nick, I thought after that debacle that when much later after it, weeks, the ANC and the DA both emerged with this sort of humility, both sides acknowledging their role in derailing the GNU, let's say, and it presenting to South Africans a united front, a coalition that would put their differences aside and prioritize things like job creation and growth. So both of them presented that a few weeks after the second attempt to table the budget. And I thought, okay, we're moving in the right direction. Perhaps we can put some of the public spats away for good. And then I see Lesufi come out today with swinging hard against the DA. And as you say, he's not saying something different. We've always known that these political parties are sworn enemies, but that they would, put their swords aside. And it's called marumofase, putting your weapons, lowering your weapons in order to fight for a greater cause. But I think that's also influenced by things like the election being around the corner and individuals like Lesufi and Mashatile seeking to separate themselves from those sellouts in the ANC who supported the GNU in the first place and were keen on the DA being part of it. And so I think even when there are so many things, so many demands on the GNU, the latest unemployment figures came out and unemployment rose by a couple 100,000 people. more who are unemployed than they were in the previous quarter. You've got these adjustments to the rates of growth. You've got all these things demanding the attention of the GNU. Unfortunately, it's all going to get shrouded by the electioneering that these political parties, the show effectively, that they now have to put on, with the local government election being less than, or at least a year away. So not surprising there from Lesufi. He's making utterances or statements that we've all already known. It's just disappointing that a GNU that's supposed to be putting forward a united front just can't seem to get it together.
So on the question on his comments on employment equity, affirmative action, BEE, that kind of stuff, what's interesting to me about this is, I mean, obviously we know that Lesufi is the kind of guy who is super in favor of so-called transformation, which, enriches a small elite and doesn't do much for the majority of South Africans, but put that aside for a moment. Even in his arguments in favor of it and attacking the DA here, he's still kind of almost trying to characterize BEE and race criteria as somehow being a part of meritocracy. He's kind of trying to argue that there's no way that it could have the negative effects that people think that it might have. That merit shouldn't be important. And I think that in of itself is a admission of the reality, is that at the end of the day, people prefer merit over racial bean counting. And I think you see that in a way that Lesufi is kind of trying to twist the actual effects of BEE. I don't know. What's your take on those comments he made?
Sure. This conversation, I fear that this conversation about the employment equity is being derailed by comments like, or how Lesufi is framing it, right? That this is an attack on Black qualified people who would otherwise get these positions. And now who the employment equity wants to put in those positions, despite all the forces resisting Black qualified people being represented in different sectors. That characterization has been very effective, and I've seen that that's sort of what's captured the public discourse around this. It's just not reflective of the truth. It's not reflective of what these 18 sectors that have been identified and the quotas that they now have to adhere to are trying to implement. What it effectively means is that if in a government department or a private company that falls among the 18 sectors, say education, for example, if Black women are represented more than the target that's been arbitrarily set by the Minister of Employment and Labor, if those women, Black women, Indian women, colored women, whatever race, is overrepresented above the target that has been enumerated by the minister, then that department can no longer hire any more of those candidates. So it actually cuts off the ability of Black women to be represented in a career that they're overrepresented in. The same applies for Indian women or Indian men, right?
Right. This is one of the insidious things about this piece of legislation is, there's a larger conversation to be had about the role of race in these employment targets and all that kind of thing. But the other aspect, of course, of the employment equity sectoral targets is the incredible amount of micromanagement, the ridiculous attempt to overly socially engineer the entire economy, to say this is, because remember, it's not just as many of our listeners have probably heard by now, it's not just race quotas, they're gender quotas too. And as you say, that could very easily mean that Black South Africans or women or whatever of those groups you want, whatever combination you want to point out, can be screwed over essentially by the system.
Absolutely. And listen, naturally, you would expect to see certain cultures represented in certain career fields. I think sometimes it is a cultural thing, right? Like you can play into the stereotype that Indians are usually become doctors, for example. So if they are overrepresented in the medical industry, for example, the minister says, you can't excel that much. Slow your roll so that we can put more of this group of a different sex or a different race. It has absolutely nothing to do with transformation. It's just micromanagement. It's a shuffling of the chairs on the deck. It has absolutely nothing. If this transformation was geared towards transforming the lives of the poor so that they can be included in the economy, I'd be the biggest champion for it. But it has absolutely nothing to do with that. And these are the distractions they have to deploy from the fact that they haven't been successful at growing the economy and generating jobs, so that we're not fighting over this limited pie, that's like this limited number of jobs, right? That's not how an economy works. Jobs beget more jobs, right? But they are fostering this zero-sum game mentality on us, and now we have to, almost like rats in a bucket, right, be selected. Like the best the best crabs in this bucket have to be selected by the minister, but it actually has nothing to do with the best. It all comes down to sex and race, which is, it's absurd.
Yeah, no, agreed. Okay, let's move on to our next story. And this is about the real costs of police incapacity. Intercape, the bus company, says that it has suffered 40 million rand in losses from bus attacks, and that the police have done, in their view, basically nothing, despite the fact that they have opened around 200 cases. This was at numbers given at a presentation to Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police on Wednesday, where Intercape was very frustrated by what they say is a lack of action from government in preventing attacks on buses. They said that they were forced to suspend services in certain towns in the Eastern Cape, resulting in lost revenue of 30 million rand. And they've spent 5.5 million rand in repair costs for damaged coaches and 3 million rand in additional expenditure for private security escorts for their buses. We're not talking about transferring, huge piles of money or gold places. This is just normal buses taking people between towns. They also had to cover medical bills for injured passengers, which was about 420,000 rand they've spent on it. They told the committee that they've opened 200 cases with the police, ranging from murder to attempted murder to intimidation and extortion. But to their knowledge, basically nothing has been done on any of these. Weirdly, and I think this is a real indictment of the situation here, the police say they only have 76 cases on record, 14 had been withdrawn, 2 cases are awaiting a decision on prosecution, 33 cases have been finalized as undetected, and 22 cases are pending investigation. Makone, this is sort of like, quintessential story of how the South African Police Service is not operating as it should. When you start off with the fact that the police can't agree on how many cases have been filed, it's not a great sign for the rest of how you're expecting them to perform. What's your take on this?
We've spoken at length on this show about our experiences and encounters with crime, your house break-in, my theft out of a motor vehicle, and how these were just basically ignored. And I like to imagine in those instances, we got a flood of comments from many of our viewers agreeing that they've had the same experience. And I like to imagine that those, a few incidents of crime here and there are ignored so that the police can dedicate their resources to larger acts of crime like this, right? Intercape transports millions of South Africans yearly, and they make an enormous contribution to our economy. So I like to imagine that the police is actually getting on with those issues that actually make a dent in how our economy functions, how our infrastructure operates. And yet the police have just been an absolute no-show in this instance. And one of the things that's intimated, bless you, intimated in this article is the involvement of the taxi drivers, the ultimate mafia in South Africa. Because before we learned about the construction mafia, before we learned about the protection fees, before we learned about the Zamazamas as a mafia, there was always this hot button issue in South Africa that you cannot touch it, and that's the control that the taxis have over South African roads and ultimately South African politicians. They are able to cripple critical elements of our economy, and we all just live in fear of them. We dance around the issue, we never get around to resolving it, and this is just another instance of that in the Eastern Cape. And it's so unfortunate because the people who suffer in the end, yes, it's Inter-Cape, but also passengers, residents, people who go to work, people who go to school and use these buses daily in the Eastern Cape. It's incredible. It's an incredible tragedy.
Right, and it's not just the economic losses or the fact that people can't, travel. It's the fact that literally people were injured or killed in some of these instances. So it is literally lives lost. A shocking state of affairs, to say the least. And this is why urgent reform is needed in the police. because you can actually have a lot of the right policies for creating economic growth, but if every time you try to run your business, some mafia shows up and tries to murder you or extract some fee from you, there's a limit to how far you can get. So I think police reform must be at the core of any plan to get South Africa working properly. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I would suggest, if you're interested in the situation in Johannesburg, going to Currency News, I think it's the website.co.za, and checking out their opinion piece, No Laughs at Dada Moreira's Joburg Circus. It's amusing, and I think very accurately sums up the state of the city of Joburg right now. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund